Have you ever wondered how much of the pain you carry today belongs to this moment, and how much of it belongs to a story you have been quietly repeating for years? Perhaps there is a sentence you have carried so long that you no longer recognize it as a sentence. It simply feels like the truth. Maybe it says, "I am not enough." Maybe it says, "People always leave." Maybe it says, "I have wasted too much time." Or perhaps it whispers something even more subtle, "This is just who I am." And because you have heard that voice so many times, you may have stopped questioning it. But what if the voice describing your life is not the same thing as the life within you? What if the story you tell yourself about who you are is only a collection of memories, interpretations, fears, and judgments that accumulated along the way? And what if beneath all of those stories there is something quieter, something that has never been wounded in quite the way your mind believes it has? There may be a part of you that already knows this. You sometimes feel it in moments when everything becomes still. Perhaps you are watching the evening sky and for a few seconds you forget what you are worried about. Perhaps you are sitting beside someone you love and there is nothing to prove. Perhaps you wake before the rest of the world and notice the silence before your thoughts begin naming everything that is wrong. For those few moments, your history loosens its grip. You are not thinking about who disappointed you. You are not calculating what might happen tomorrow. You are not comparing yourself with someone else. You are simply present. And strangely, nothing is missing. There is something important hidden in those moments. They suggest that peace may not be something you have to manufacture. Perhaps peace is what remains when you temporarily stop arguing with yourself, judging yourself, defending yourself, and carrying every previous version of yourself into the present. We spend so much of life trying to become stronger. We imagine strength as the ability to endure more, accomplish more, protect ourselves more carefully, or make sure that no one can hurt us again. Yet there is another kind of strength, a quieter kind. It does not need armor. It is the strength to look at an old story and gently say, "This happened to me, but perhaps it does not have to define me." There is a profound difference between saying, "I experienced rejection," and saying, "I am unwanted." There is a difference between saying, "I made a mistake," and saying, "I am a failure." There is a difference between saying someone betrayed me and saying no one can be trusted. The first statement describes something that occurred. The second creates an identity around it. And without realizing it, many of us have spent years turning experiences into identities. You may have learned to please everyone because somewhere in your story you concluded that love had to be earned. You may struggle to trust because someone once taught you that closeness could lead to pain. You may compare yourself constantly because you learned to measure your worth through the eyes of others. You may worry about everything because worry gives the ego the comforting illusion that it can control what has not yet happened. None of this makes you weak. It simply means that the mind has been trying to protect you with the only tools it knows. The ego loves stories because stories give it continuity. It wants to know who you were yesterday so it can tell you who you must be tomorrow. It gathers evidence. It remembers insults. It stores disappointments. It keeps a careful record of the moments when you were overlooked, misunderstood, abandoned, embarrassed, or afraid. Then it brings these records into the present and says, "See, this is why you must be careful." But awareness allows you to ask a different question. Who is noticing the story? If you can observe the thought, "I am not good enough," then perhaps there is something within you that is deeper than that thought. If you can notice your fear, perhaps you are not merely the fear. If you can become aware of your resentment, perhaps your deepest identity is not resentment. There is the storm, and there is the sky in which the storm appears. The storm can be intense. It can fill your entire field of vision. Thunder may convince you that nothing else exists, yet the sky itself has not disappeared. Your thoughts are sometimes like that weather. They move through consciousness and appear so convincing that you mistake them for the whole sky. Perhaps spiritual awakening begins very quietly, not with some extraordinary experience, but with the recognition that you do not have to believe every thought that passes through you. You can notice it. You can listen to it. You can even understand where it came from. And then you can allow it to pass. Imagine standing beside a river. Leaves are floating downstream. Some are beautiful, some are broken. Some have traveled a great distance before reaching you. You do not need to jump into the river and chase every leaf. You can simply watch it move. Your thoughts can be met in the same way. A memory appears. A judgment appears. A fear appears. An old conversation returns. The mind says, "Remember what happened." and awareness quietly responds, "Yes, I remember, but I am here now." That simple recognition begins to change your relationship with your past. You do not have to erase what happened. You do not need to pretend that painful things were not painful. Spiritual peace is not denial. It is not covering wounds with beautiful words and pretending they never existed. It is something much more compassionate. It is allowing the wound to be part of your history without allowing it to become the definition of your being. Think about a tree after a difficult season. A branch may have broken. The wind may have left marks on its trunk. Yet the tree does not spend the spring explaining to every new leaf what happened during the winter. Life continues moving through it. Perhaps life is still trying to move through you in the same way. You may be tired because you have been carrying a version of yourself that no longer belongs to the person you are becoming aware of. You may be exhausted not only from what happened, but from constantly rehearsing what happened. You may feel disconnected because you have been listening so closely to the voice of fear that you have forgotten the quieter voice beneath it. That quieter voice does not argue. It does not need to prove your worth. It does not compare your path with someone else's path. It simply reminds you that before anyone judged you, before anyone rejected you, before you succeeded or failed at anything, there was already life within you. There was already awareness. There was already something sacred. You might call it spirit. You might call it consciousness. You might call it the source. The name matters less than the recognition that your deepest self cannot be reduced to the events that have occurred around you. And this is where an entirely different kind of healing becomes possible. Instead of asking, "How do I fix everything that is wrong with me?" you begin asking, "What if I am not as broken as my story says I am?" Instead of asking, "How can I become worthy of love?" you begin wondering whether love is already part of your nature. Instead of asking, "How do I control what happens next?" you begin discovering whether you can meet what comes next from a place of greater trust. These are not questions that need immediate answers. Allow them to remain with you. Sometimes the most meaningful questions are like seeds. They do not reveal themselves the moment they enter the soil. They need silence. They need patience. They need the willingness to stop digging them up every morning to see whether they have grown. Perhaps one of those seeds is being planted in you now. What if you are stronger than the story you tell yourself? Not because you can fight the story harder, but because you were never merely the story in the first place. What if beneath the anxiety, beneath the regret, beneath the need to please, beneath the old anger and the fear of what comes next, there is a part of you that has remained quietly connected to something larger? You do not have to become that part of yourself. You may only need to remember it. And as we look more deeply at the voice that has been telling you who you are, you may begin to notice something surprising. The very part of the mind that promises to protect you can also become the part that keeps you imprisoned in yesterday. Understanding that voice without fighting it and without judging it may be one of the first doors to freedom. The voice that keeps you connected to yesterday is not necessarily your enemy. It may help to understand that before trying to silence it. Much of what we call the ego began as an attempt to keep us safe. It learned from experience. It noticed what caused pain. It remembered what brought approval. It discovered which parts of you seemed acceptable to others and which parts seemed to create conflict. Then, little by little, it began constructing a version of you designed to survive the world. Perhaps this is why the ego can feel so convincing. It does not usually arrive announcing itself as fear. It sounds more reasonable than that. It says, "Be careful." It says, "Do not trust too much." It says, "Make sure they approve of you." It says, "You cannot let that happen again." It says, "If you could only control this situation, then you could finally relax." And for a while, you may believe it. You may even organize your entire life around these messages without realizing that you are doing so. Imagine that someone you care about becomes quiet. They do not answer your message as quickly as usual. Nothing has actually happened yet, but your mind begins filling the silence. Perhaps they are angry. Perhaps you said something wrong. Perhaps they are losing interest. Perhaps you are about to be abandoned. Within minutes, you are no longer responding to what is happening. You are responding to a story about what might be happening. This is one of the ego's favorite places to live. The distance between reality and interpretation. Reality may simply be that someone has not responded. The story says you are being rejected again, and suddenly an ordinary moment becomes connected to every previous moment in which you felt unwanted. Notice what has happened. The past has entered the present wearing a new face. Awareness allows you to interrupt this process gently, not by saying, "I should not feel this way," because that only adds judgment to fear. Instead, you might notice, there is fear here. My mind is trying to protect me by predicting what this silence means. That small change in language creates space. You are no longer trapped inside the fear. You are witnessing it. And what you can witness, you no longer have to obey automatically. This is one of the quiet freedoms of awareness. It does not necessarily remove every difficult emotion. It changes your relationship with the emotion. You can feel fear without allowing fear to write the next chapter. You can experience uncertainty without demanding that uncertainty disappear. You can notice an old wound without building a home inside it. For many people, control becomes the way the ego tries to prevent pain. You plan every possibility. You replay conversations before they happen. You try to predict what other people will do. You imagine the worst outcome so you will somehow be prepared if it arrives. And underneath all this mental activity is often a very tender belief. If I can think enough, perhaps I can keep myself safe. But life refuses to become completely predictable. People change, bodies age, relationships evolve, plans fall apart, seasons turn, whether we approve of them or not. Someone you love may choose a path you never expected. A door you were certain would open may remain closed. Another door you never noticed may appear quietly beside you. The ego experiences this uncertainty as a threat because it wants guarantees. The deeper self may experience the same uncertainty as an invitation to trust. Think of a river flowing toward the ocean. The river does not know every stone it will encounter. It does not demand that the entire landscape reveal itself before it moves. It meets what is in front of it. Sometimes it moves quickly. Sometimes it becomes still. Sometimes it bends around an obstacle rather than breaking through it. Perhaps there is wisdom in this. You have probably been taught, in many ways, that strength means forcing life to move according to your plans. But what if another kind of strength exists? What if strength sometimes means remaining inwardly peaceful when the path changes? This does not mean becoming passive. It does not mean refusing to make choices. You can have intentions, you can move toward what feels meaningful, you can care deeply about the direction of your life. The difference is whether you are moving from fear or from alignment. Fear says, "This must happen," or "I cannot be at peace." Intention says, "This is where my heart is guiding me and I will walk toward it without making my peace dependent upon the outcome." That difference may seem small, but inwardly it changes everything. Attachment says that your happiness is somewhere in the future, waiting behind a particular event. When this relationship works, then I will be whole. When this person understands me, then I will feel peaceful. When my circumstances change, then I can finally relax. When I become the person I think I should be, then perhaps I will deserve my own love. And so peace is continually postponed. The present becomes nothing more than a hallway leading toward another room. But how many years can disappear this way? How many ordinary mornings have been overlooked because the mind was waiting for a more important future? How many conversations have been half heard because you were thinking about what should happen next? How many peaceful moments were available? But the ego insisted that peace could not begin until something outside you changed. There is nothing wrong with wanting life to change. The suffering begins when you make your inner state entirely dependent upon that change. This is why the story you tell yourself matters so much. If your story says, "I cannot be peaceful until they apologize," then another person has been given responsibility for your peace. If your story says, "I cannot love myself until someone chooses me," then your worth has been placed in someone else's hands. If your story says, "My life should have happened differently," then you may spend the present arguing with a past that cannot answer you. And if your story says, "Everyone else is ahead of me," you may begin abandoning your own path in order to chase someone else's. Comparison is another subtle expression of the ego because comparison requires you to forget the uniqueness of your own unfolding. You see someone who appears happier, more confident, more loved, more certain of their purpose. You see only a small window into their life, yet your mind compares that window with the most vulnerable rooms inside your own. Then comes the judgment. I should be further along. I should have figured this out by now. Why is everyone else moving while I am still here? Perhaps you have felt this while watching other people's lives through a screen. You may begin peacefully enough, and 20 minutes later, something inside you feels inadequate. Nothing about your actual life has changed during those 20 minutes. The room around you is the same. The breath entering your body is the same. Yet your interpretation of yourself has changed. This reveals something important. Much of suffering is not created by the moment itself, but by the meaning the ego places upon the moment. A tree does not look across the forest and decide that it has failed because another tree is taller. A flower does not apologize because it bloomed later than the flower beside it. Nature seems to understand something the human ego often forgets. Life unfolds according to different rhythms. Perhaps your timing does not need to resemble anyone else's. Perhaps being uncertain at this stage of your life does not mean you are lost. Perhaps the period you have been calling stuck contains a kind of inner preparation that cannot be measured from the outside. There are seasons when nothing seems to be happening above the ground, yet roots are growing in darkness. Your life may have seasons like that. And if you judge the season too quickly, you may call something a failure that is actually asking you to become still enough to listen. The ego does not enjoy stillness because stillness makes its stories easier to see. When you are constantly busy, distracted, comparing, reacting, planning, defending, and worrying, the voice in your mind can appear to be reality itself. But sit quietly for a few moments and you may begin noticing how quickly one thought replaces another. A memory arrives, then a judgment, then a plan, then an imaginary conversation, then a fear about something that has not happened, then a memory about something that happened 10 years ago. The mind moves from one thought to another like waves, moving across the surface of an ocean. Yet the ocean is more than its waves. There is depth beneath the movement. Perhaps you have depth beneath your thoughts as well. This is why moments of stillness can become so meaningful. You are not trying to force your mind into silence. You are simply discovering that you can sit beside its movement without becoming every thought it produces. You might notice yourself thinking, "I am falling behind," and instead of immediately believing it, you become curious. Who says I am behind? Behind whom? According to whose timetable? You may discover that the statement is not a fact at all. It is a judgment inherited from comparison. Another thought might say, "I always ruin relationships." Again, you can become curious. Is that the truth of who you are? Or is that a painful conclusion drawn from several experiences? The ego loves words like always and never. I always get hurt. No one understands me. I will never change. Things never work out for me. These words make temporary experiences feel permanent. Awareness begins loosening their certainty. Maybe you were hurt. Maybe deeply. Maybe someone did not understand you. Maybe something you hoped for did not work. You do not need to deny any of it. But perhaps the past does not deserve the authority to predict every future moment. This is where self-compassion becomes important. When you discover how many years you have been believing an old story, it is tempting to create another story in which you blame yourself for believing it. How could I have wasted so much time? Why didn't I understand this earlier? I should have known better. But notice what the ego has done. It has simply changed costumes. Yesterday it criticized you for your wounds. Today it criticizes you for not healing them quickly enough. You do not become free from judgment by judging yourself more efficiently. You become free by bringing awareness and love to the place where judgment once lived. Imagine speaking to the younger version of you who first learned to be afraid. Perhaps that version of you learned to stay quiet to avoid conflict. Perhaps you learned to become useful so people would need you. Perhaps you became agreeable because disagreement felt dangerous. Perhaps you became emotionally distant because closeness had once brought disappointment. Would you look at that younger self and say, "You were foolish"? Or might you see someone who was simply trying to find safety? When you see your patterns this way, something softens. People-pleasing no longer looks like a character flaw. You begin seeing the fear underneath it. Control no longer looks like strength. You see the insecurity underneath it. Anger may reveal grief. Jealousy may reveal a fear of not being enough. Withdrawal may reveal the memory of being hurt. And once you can see what is beneath the behavior, you can begin meeting yourself differently. Awareness without compassion can become another form of self-criticism. Awareness with love becomes transformation. This also changes the way you see other people. Consider someone who has disappointed you. Perhaps you have replayed what they did many times. Each repetition strengthens the story. They become the villain, and you become the wounded person. The mind likes this arrangement because it is clear. It knows whom to blame. But there is a hidden cost. Every time you rehearse the injury, you allow yesterday's event to produce today's emotion. The person may not even be in the room. They may be hundreds of miles away. They may have moved on entirely. Yet your body tightens when their name appears in your mind. Who is carrying the burden now? Forgiveness will become part of this journey, but before forgiveness can arise naturally, awareness must reveal what resentment is costing you. You do not forgive because what happened was acceptable. You do not forgive because pain should be ignored. You forgive eventually because you begin understanding that your peace is too sacred to remain permanently tied to another person's behavior. There is a great difference between remembering an experience and continuing to relive it. Memory says, this happened. Resentment says, this must continue happening inside me. Awareness offers another possibility. It says, I can honor what I learned without carrying the poison. Sometimes the person you most need to release from judgment is yourself. Perhaps you still replay a decision from years ago. You imagine what life would look like if you had chosen differently. You revisit the conversation, the relationship, the opportunity, the mistake. You judge the person you were then using the awareness you possess now. But the person you were then did not have the awareness you possess now. You made choices from the consciousness available to you at that time. Could you allow that younger version of yourself to be human? Could you stop demanding that your past self possess wisdom that only experience could teach? A garden does not condemn a seed because it has not yet become a flower. Growth unfolds through stages. Perhaps your mistakes were not proof that you were broken. Perhaps some of them became the soil in which understanding grew. This does not mean every mistake was necessary or desirable. It simply means you do not have to continue punishing yourself in order to prove that you learned from it. You can learn and release. You can take responsibility and still love yourself. You can regret an action without turning regret into identity. You can say, I would choose differently today, and allow that recognition itself to become evidence that consciousness has expanded. The ego often believes punishment creates transformation. Love knows that awareness transforms much more deeply. And then there is fear of the future. Perhaps this is where your story becomes most convincing, because the mind takes what happened before and projects it forward. A relationship ended, so perhaps the next one will too. You experience loss, so you hesitate to love deeply again. You were embarrassed once, so you avoid situations where you might be seen. Something unexpected happens, so now you try to prepare for every possible disaster. The mind calls this protection. But sometimes protection slowly becomes imprisonment. A boat may be safest when tied securely to the shore, but safety is not the only reason boats exist. There may come a moment when you realize that avoiding every possibility of pain also means avoiding many possibilities of connection, tenderness, discovery, and love. The deeper self does not promise that life will never hurt. It offers something more meaningful. It reminds you that whatever comes, you do not have to abandon yourself. You can meet uncertainty without becoming uncertainty. You can meet loss without becoming loss. You can meet rejection without turning rejection into a statement about your worth. You can meet change while remaining connected to the quiet presence within you. This is a very different kind of strength. It is not the strength of a wall that refuses to move. It is the strength of a tree that bends in the wind while remaining rooted. Perhaps that is what you have been learning all along. Not how to create a life in which nothing difficult ever happens, but how to remain connected to yourself when life does not follow the story you expected. And slowly, the question begins changing. Instead of asking, how can I make sure I am never hurt again? You might ask, how can I remain rooted in love, even when I cannot control what happens? Instead of asking, how can I get everyone to understand me? You might ask, can I understand myself deeply enough that I no longer need every person to validate my path? Instead of asking, how do I become stronger than everyone who hurt me? You might ask, what would happen if I no longer organize my identity around being hurt? These questions lead somewhere the ego cannot take you. They lead inward. And inward does not mean withdrawing from life. It means discovering the place from which you can participate in life without constantly asking the outer world to tell you who you are. When you begin resting there, even briefly, something beautiful happens. You stop fighting every thought. You stop needing to correct every opinion someone has about you. You stop trying to control every ending. You begin noticing that beneath the noise, beneath the old stories, beneath all the identities you have collected, There is a presence that does not need to become worthy. It already belongs. It already exists. It was there before the story began. And perhaps the next part of your journey is not about becoming powerful enough to destroy your old story. Perhaps it is about loving yourself enough to put the story down. Because once the grip of the ego begins to soften, another question quietly emerges. If you are not the fear you inherited, the resentment you carried, the mistakes you made, the roles you played, or the judgments you believed, then who are you beneath all of it? The answer may not come from thinking harder. It may come through forgiveness, through surrender, through love, through the willingness to become quiet enough to recognize the self that was never truly lost. If the answer cannot be found by thinking harder, perhaps it begins when you become willing to listen differently. Not to the restless voice that keeps reviewing the past or preparing for the future, but to the quieter presence beneath all that movement. There is a part of you that does not need to explain itself. It does not need to win an argument with yesterday. It does not need to prove that you deserve better. It simply waits beneath the noise, like still water beneath the surface of a restless sea. Returning to your true self may be less about adding something to your life and more about releasing what has been covering what was already there. This is why forgiveness can become such a powerful doorway. Forgiveness is often misunderstood. You may hear the word and immediately think of someone who hurt you. Perhaps part of you resists. Why should I forgive them? Why should they be released from responsibility? Why should I pretend that what happened did not matter? But forgiveness does not ask you to call something loving when it was unloving. It does not require you to invite harmful people back into your life. It does not erase boundaries, wisdom, or responsibility. Forgiveness is an inward decision about what you are willing to continue carrying. Imagine holding a burning coal because someone else placed it in your hand years ago. At first, your anger may feel justified, and perhaps it is. But eventually, the deeper question becomes not whether you had a right to feel hurt, but whether you still want the pain to occupy your inner world. You can put the coal down without saying that it never burned you. Perhaps that is forgiveness. You are not changing yesterday. You are changing your relationship with yesterday. There may be someone whose name still changes your breathing. You may remember what they said, what they failed to say, how they left, how they betrayed your trust, or how they made you question your worth. For years, you may have carried an imaginary conversation with them, waiting for an apology that never arrived. The ego says, I will be free, when they finally understand what they did. But what if they never understand? What if they never apologize in the way you need? Must your peace remain unavailable forever? There comes a moment when forgiveness becomes less about them and more about your willingness to stop giving them a permanent room inside your consciousness. You might quietly say, I do not approve of what happened. I do not deny what it cost me, but I am no longer willing to build my identity around this wound. Something begins to loosen when you say this sincerely. You may still remember. You may still feel sadness. But memory no longer has to become a prison. And perhaps forgiveness needs to move in another direction too, toward yourself. Many people can imagine eventually forgiving another person, yet they continue carrying a private courtroom inside themselves. They are both the accused and the judge. You remember the relationship you stayed in too long, the moment you did not speak up, the opportunity you were too afraid to take, the words you wish you could retrieve, the years you spent trying to be someone others would approve of. And the mind says, you should have known. But how could the person you were then know everything the person you are now has learned? You were living from the awareness available to you. Perhaps you stayed because you were afraid. Perhaps you remained silent because silence once protected you. Perhaps you chased approval because you had not yet discovered how to give yourself the acceptance you were asking others to provide. Perhaps you chose from fear because you had not yet remembered the difference between fear and love. Can you see that version of yourself with tenderness? Not indulgence, not denial, tenderness. You can take responsibility without turning responsibility into lifelong punishment. You can say, yes, I would choose differently now, and then perhaps add, and I am grateful that I can see differently now. That is growth without self-rejection. A seed does not apologize for the time it spent beneath the soil. Darkness was part of its unfolding. Roots were developing where no one could see them. Perhaps some of your darkest seasons were like that. You thought nothing was happening because your outer circumstances had not changed, yet somewhere beneath the surface, your understanding was deepening. You were learning what you could no longer tolerate. You were discovering the cost of abandoning yourself. You are beginning to hear the difference between the voice of fear and the voice of inner knowing. One day, what had been developing quietly began reaching toward the light. You may be in such a season now. If so, there is no need to rush it. The ego wants transformation to happen on a schedule. It wants evidence. It wants to know how long healing will take and exactly what life will look like afterward. But inner transformation rarely moves in a straight line. There may be mornings when you feel peaceful and evenings when an old memory returns. There may be weeks when you feel free and then one conversation awakens a fear you thought you had released. This does not mean you are moving backward. The ocean has waves, even when the tide is changing. Healing can have waves too. What matters is that you begin meeting the returning story with a different consciousness. Perhaps before, when fear appeared, you immediately became fear. Now you notice it. Before, when someone disappointed you, resentment took over the entire inner landscape. Now there may be a small space in which you can choose your response. Before, when you made a mistake, you attacked yourself. Now perhaps you can say, something in me needs understanding. That space is important. That space is where freedom begins. And freedom often asks for surrender. Surrender can sound frightening because the ego hears it as defeat. It imagines surrender means giving up, becoming passive, or allowing life to walk over you. But spiritual surrender is something very different. It is the willingness to stop fighting reality simply because reality did not follow your preferred script. There are things you can change. Change them when love guides you to do so. There are conversations you need to have them with as much honesty and peace as you can. There are boundaries you may need to create them without hatred if possible. And there are things you cannot change. Someone made a choice. A relationship ended. Time passed. A person you loved died. Your body changed. A chapter closed before you were ready. You can spend years telling reality that it should have been different. Or slowly, painfully, compassionately, you can begin saying, this is what happened. I do not have to like it. But I no longer want to spend my life fighting the fact that it happened. Acceptance is not approval. Acceptance is ending the argument with what already is. There is enormous energy hidden inside that argument. Think of how exhausting it is to continually repeat, this should not have happened. The mind believes that if it repeats this long enough, perhaps the past will finally obey. But the past remains silent, and all that energy stays trapped in resistance. When resistance softens, the energy that was used to fight yesterday becomes available for living today. You begin seeing the person sitting across from you instead of comparing them with someone from your past. You begin noticing the morning instead of immediately entering yesterday's worries. You begin feeling your own life again. This is why letting go is not losing. Sometimes letting go is the moment you finally receive the present. Imagine standing beside a river while holding tightly to a branch. The current moves naturally around you, but you refuse to release your grip because the branch feels familiar. Your arms ache. Your body becomes exhausted. Eventually, you may believe the river is causing your suffering, but perhaps the suffering is partly coming from the grip. Life has a current too. Everything changes. Children grow. Parents age. Relationships transform. Bodies change. Ideas that once defined you no longer fit. People arrive and leave. Seasons open and close. The ego says, hold on. The deeper self whispers, trust. Trust does not mean knowing where the river leads. It means discovering that you do not need to know everything in order to be present for the next part of the journey. This is where intention becomes different from control. You can still choose the direction in which you wish to live. You can choose kindness. You can choose honesty. You can choose to stop participating in relationships that require you to abandon yourself. You can choose to bring peace into a conversation rather than trying to win it. You can choose to become aware of the energy you bring into a room. But you do not need to control how everyone responds. Imagine waking in the morning and setting a very simple intention. Today, I want to remember who I am beneath fear. Notice how different this feels from saying, today, everything must go my way. The first intention is inward. Traffic may still be slow. Someone may still be impatient. A plan may still change. You may receive news you did not expect. But your intention remains available. You can ask, who do I choose to be in relationship with this moment? This is where spiritual strength becomes practical. It appears when someone criticizes you and you pause before allowing their words to become your identity. It appears when you feel the urge to please someone at the cost of your own truth and gently remain connected to yourself. It appears when anxiety begins predicting tomorrow and you return your attention to the breath moving through you now. It appears when an old memory arrives and you can say, I remember you, but you do not need to lead me today. These may seem like small moments, yet a life is made of small moments. You do not return to your true self once and remain there forever. You remember, forget, and remember again. Perhaps that is part of being human. You wake up spiritually, then an old fear catches your attention. You return to peace, then the ego tells you that you need someone's approval. You remember your wholeness, then comparison convinces you that something is missing. There is no need to condemn yourself for forgetting. Simply return. Return as many times as necessary. The sun does not become offended because clouds temporarily hide it. It remains what it is. Perhaps your true nature is like that. Fear may cover it. Resentment may cover it. Judgment may cover it. Years of conditioning may cover it. But covering something is not the same as destroying it. This is why you do not need to manufacture love. You may need to remove what prevents you from experiencing the love already within you. And love, in this sense, is not merely an emotion toward another person. It is a way of being. It is how you look at yourself when you fail. It is how you hold your own fear without becoming ashamed of it. It is how you allow another person to be imperfect without making their imperfection responsible for your inner state. It is how you remain open to life without demanding guarantees. Fear asks, what if I lose this? Love asks, can I appreciate this while it is here? Fear asks, what if they reject me? Love asks, can I remain connected to my own worth regardless of their decision? Fear asks, what if the future goes wrong? Love asks, can I meet this moment fully before asking the future to explain itself? The movement from fear to love is rarely dramatic. Often it happens through these quiet shifts. Perhaps you are walking alone one evening and suddenly realize you have not thought about an old hurt for several hours. Perhaps someone mentions a person who once wounded you and you notice that your body no longer tightens in the same way. Perhaps you look in the mirror and instead of immediately searching for what needs to change, you simply see a human being who has traveled a long way. These moments may not look like spiritual awakening from the outside, but inwardly, they are enormous. You are no longer feeding the identity that required suffering to explain who you were. You are beginning to live from something deeper. And as you become quieter inside, you may begin sensing what some call the source. You do not have to define it. Perhaps you experience it as God, perhaps as consciousness, perhaps as an intelligence moving through nature and through you, perhaps simply as the mysterious presence you feel when your mind becomes still enough. Look at a forest. No one stands beside the trees instructing them how to grow. Look at the ocean. No human hand commands the tide. Look at your own body. Even while you sleep, your heart continues. Breath moves, cells renew. Life is happening through you without your conscious management. Perhaps there is something humbling in this. The ego says, everything depends on me. The source reminds you, you are participating in something much larger than your plans. This does not make you insignificant. It may make you deeply connected. You are not a separate fragment trying desperately to control an indifferent universe. Perhaps you are an expression of the same life that moves through rivers, trees, oceans, stars, and every person you meet. And if that is even partly true, then your identity is far greater than the story your fear has written. The story says, I am the person who was abandoned. The deeper self says, I am life continuing. The story says, I failed. The deeper self says, I learned. The story says, I am alone. The deeper self says, I am connected to something I cannot always see. The story says, I must protect myself from everything. The deeper self says, I can meet life with awareness. This does not mean difficult emotions disappear. You will still be human. You may still grieve. You may still become afraid. You may still have days when old patterns feel close. But you begin understanding that emotions are visitors, not definitions. Sadness can sit beside you without becoming your identity. Fear can knock on the door without being given ownership of the house. Anger can reveal something that needs attention without becoming the voice that makes every decision. You become the space in which these experiences can move. Like the sky holding weather, like the ocean holding waves, like the earth receiving every season without forgetting what it is. And perhaps gratitude begins appearing naturally here. Not forced gratitude, not pretending that everything that happened was wonderful, a quieter gratitude. Gratitude that you are still here. Gratitude that awareness can grow. Gratitude that the heart can soften after disappointment. Gratitude that a story can be rewritten simply because you have become conscious that it was a story. You may even become grateful for the moment you finally became tired of carrying what no longer belonged to you. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that sometimes becomes a doorway. You become tired of defending the old identity, tired of explaining yourself, tired of replaying the conversation, tired of waiting for someone else to give you permission to feel whole. And something inside says, very softly, enough. Not enough in anger, enough in peace. I have carried this far enough. Then your hands begin to open. And when your hands open, you discover that letting go does not leave them empty. They become available for this moment, available for love, available for a new way of seeing, available for the life that has been waiting beneath all your attempts to control it. Perhaps this is what returning to yourself feels like. Not fireworks, not becoming someone extraordinary, simply becoming less divided inside. You no longer need one part of you to attack another. You no longer need the present to pay for the past. You no longer need another person's approval to confirm the sacredness of your existence. You begin feeling at home within yourself. And from that place, your relationship with the world changes naturally. You listen differently. You love differently. You respond differently. You walk into uncertainty differently. Not because the world has finally become predictable, but because you are no longer asking the world to give you the identity that only inner awareness can reveal. You are beginning to remember. You are not the frightened voice. You are the one who can hear. You are not the wound. You are the awareness capable of bringing love to the wound. You are not the story. You are the living presence in which the story appeared. And as this recognition becomes less of an idea and more of a way of living, another invitation appears. How do you carry this awareness into an ordinary Tuesday morning? How do you remember it when someone disappoints you, when anxiety returns, when life becomes uncertain, or when the old story begins speaking again? Perhaps the final step is not to escape ordinary life at all. Perhaps it is to bring this truth gently into the ordinary moments until remembering who you are becomes less of something you seek and more of the way you live. And so the question becomes very simple. How do you live this truth when the morning comes, when the phone rings, when plans change, when someone misunderstands you, or when an old fear suddenly returns? Perhaps you begin by remembering that you do not need to remain perfectly peaceful in order to be spiritually awake. You only need to notice when you have forgotten yourself and gently return. There will still be moments when the old story speaks loudly. You may wake with anxiety before you even know what you are anxious about. You may receive a message that awakens an old insecurity. Someone may criticize you, and for a moment you may feel yourself becoming the person who once believed that everyone else's opinion determined your worth. When that happens, there is no need to judge yourself. Simply notice. You might quietly ask, what story am I telling myself in this moment? Perhaps the story says something bad is going to happen. Perhaps it says I am not enough. Perhaps it says they should understand me. Perhaps it says I should be further along by now. Then, rather than fighting the thought, allow yourself to become still enough to see it. A thought seen clearly begins losing some of its power. You might take one slow breath and remember, this is a thought moving through me. It is not necessarily the truth of who I am. That may be enough. You do not need an elaborate spiritual practice to return to yourself. Sometimes a few quiet moments in the morning can change the quality of the day. Before reaching for the outside world, sit with yourself. Feel the breath entering and leaving your body. Notice that life has already begun without your effort. For a moment, there is nothing to solve. You are simply here. And perhaps you can ask, what would it feel like to move through this day from love rather than fear? Do not force an answer. Let the question accompany you. When you enter a difficult conversation, remember it. When you feel yourself comparing your life with someone else's, remember it. When the mind begins racing toward tomorrow, remember it. You are not trying to become someone who never experiences fear. You are simply learning that fear does not have to make every decision. You can also practice gratitude, not as a way of pretending everything is perfect, but as a way of noticing what fear often overlooks. The warmth of a cup in your hands, the sound of rain, a person who stayed, a lesson you finally understand, a body that has carried you through years of living, a quiet evening, another morning. Gratitude brings attention back to what is here. The ego is often fascinated by what is missing. Gratitude notices what has already been given. And when resentment returns, as it sometimes will, you can practice forgiveness again. Forgiveness may not be a single decision made once. Sometimes it is a door you choose to open many times. You remember what happened, and you release it again. You notice yourself rehearsing the old argument, and you release it again. You feel anger rising. And rather than becoming ashamed of the anger, you listen to what it is protecting. Then you remind yourself that you do not have to carry another person's behavior into every new day. And perhaps there is someone else you can forgive each evening, yourself. Before you sleep, you might look back at the day without creating a courtroom. Where did fear speak through you? Where did you lose your patience? Where did you seek approval? Where did you forget your own worth? Notice it. Learn from it. Then let the day end. You do not need to carry today's mistakes into tomorrow as evidence against yourself. A sunset does not apologize for ending the day. Night arrives, and eventually morning begins again. You are allowed to begin again too. This is the gentle rhythm of inner growth. Awareness, forgetting, remembering, returning, again and again. Over time, something changes. The old story may still appear, but you recognize its voice sooner. You no longer follow every fearful thought to its conclusion. You no longer need to explain yourself to everyone. You become more comfortable with silence. You begin discovering that saying no can sometimes be an act of love, and that saying yes from fear is not always kindness. You stop chasing people who require you to abandon yourself in order to remain close to them. You begin allowing others to have their opinions without turning those opinions into instructions for your identity. And perhaps most importantly, you begin trusting life a little more. Not because you know what will happen. You don't. None of us do. But you begin sensing that you do not need the entire road to be visible before taking the next peaceful step. A traveler walking at night does not need enough light to illuminate the entire journey. A small light revealing the next few steps can be enough. Your awareness can be that light. Today, perhaps the next step is forgiveness. Tomorrow, perhaps it is rest. Another day, perhaps it is having an honest conversation. Sometimes it will be letting something go. Sometimes it will be waiting. Sometimes it will simply be sitting quietly and admitting, I don't know. There can be peace even in not knowing. The ego wants certainty before it trusts. The deeper self learns to trust without requiring certainty. And gradually, you may notice that the life you were trying so hard to control begins feeling more like something you are participating in. Like a river, you still choose your direction where choice is available. You still act when action is needed, but you stop demanding that every current obey you. You begin moving with life rather than constantly pushing against it. Perhaps this is what alignment with the source means in ordinary life. It is not something distant or mysterious. It may simply be the moment you choose compassion instead of judgment. The moment you choose presence instead of worry. The moment you choose forgiveness instead of another hour of resentment. The moment you choose to listen rather than defend. The moment you remember that the same life moving through you is moving through the person standing before you. You will not do this perfectly. Perfection was never the invitation. Awareness is the invitation. Love is the invitation. Remembering is the invitation. And one day you may look back at the person you once believed yourself to be. The anxious person, the wounded person, the person who tried to please everyone, the person who believed that one mistake had ruined everything, the person who thought peace would arrive only when the outside world finally behaved correctly. You may feel tenderness for that version of yourself because you understand now you were never weak for having a story. You were simply listening to it so closely that you forgot there was something deeper listening to. You are the awareness beneath the noise. You are the space beneath the fear. You are the presence that can choose love even after experiencing pain. You are not becoming worthy. You are remembering that worth was never something the world had the authority to give or remove. You are not becoming whole. You are releasing the beliefs that convinced you that you were incomplete. And you are not becoming someone new. You are coming home to the self that existed before fear told you who you had to be. So perhaps tonight, or whenever you find yourself alone in a quiet moment, place your attention on your breath and ask yourself one question. What story am I ready to stop carrying? Do not rush to answer. Allow the silence to answer in its own way. Maybe a memory appears, maybe a name, maybe an old judgment, maybe the sentence you have repeated for years. I am not enough. I am too late. I will always be alone. I cannot change. Whatever appears, imagine holding it gently rather than fighting it. Thank it, perhaps, for whatever it once tried to protect you from. And then imagine opening your hand, let it go. Not because you know exactly what comes next, but because you no longer need yesterday to decide who you are today. There is still life within you. There is still love within you. There is still silence beneath the noise. There is still a connection to the source that no failure, rejection, loss, or judgment has ever been able to completely remove. The sky was always there behind the storm. The ocean was always deeper than the waves. The light was never destroyed by the clouds. And perhaps the peaceful self you have been searching for was never truly lost. It was simply waiting beneath the story. If something in this reflection spoke to you, you might share in the comments the story you feel ready to release. Sometimes putting a truth into words is a gentle way of beginning to loosen its hold. And if these quiet spiritual journeys help you return to yourself, you are welcome to subscribe and continue walking with us. Until then, let's move gently through your life. Forgive when you are ready. Become still when the world becomes loud. Return to gratitude when fear tells you something is missing. Trust when you cannot see the entire path. And whenever the old story returns, remember that you do not have to fight it. You only have to remember who is listening. You have a story, but you are not your story. You are the awareness behind it, the love beneath it, and the life that continues beyond it. And you may discover that this is where your real strength has been waiting all along.